So there are four major characteristics of chordates. So these are derived characters, meaning that chordates have these, all chordates have these, but non-chordates like the echinoderms are not going to have these characteristics. So let's go through these one by one. The first is the notochord, and this is where we get our name chordates. And the notochord is right here. This is the kind of orange structure right there. And it exists in between the digestive tube, which is going to be down here, and the actual nerve cord. So this is a longitudinal, meaning it goes from head to tail, and it's flexible. And this is usually fluid-filled cells that are wrapped in some kind of fibrous tissue. Some organisms will retain this or parts of it. So in a human, the notochord is actually the teeny tiny little discs between your vertebrae. Once we start to see vertebrae, they're going to surround the notochord, so they're going to kind of cover it up with a more bony structure. The second one here is the dorsal hollow nerve cord. So this is dorsal, meaning it's on the top here. And this is our spinal cord, which is going to swell in the head to the brain. And this being dorsal is actually new. Most invertebrates have a ventral nerve cord, and this is going to become your central nervous system. So in a human, this is your brain and spinal cord. Number 3 is our pharyngeal slits or clefts. So here we can see these little slits here in the throat of the digestive tube. So some organisms are going to retain these. These are typically going to allow water to move through the grooves. We believe that the first function of these pharyngeal slits was actually for feeding. So they would allow water to leave and then keep the food inside of the gut tube. And then these later developed into gills. So gills are going to be involved in acquiring oxygen from the water for breathing. And then in organisms like tetrapods, these are going to develop into structures inside of the ear, the head, and the neck. And then the fourth is a muscular post-anal tail. So post means after, anus is right here. So this section back here is going to be my post-anal tail. And you can see these little V's, those are the muscle segments here. And so every chordate has a muscular post-anal tail at some point. Same goes for all of these characteristics. You have to have them at some point, but they don't always persist into adulthood. So a lot of groups see a large reduction in the post-anal tail as they develop through embryology. So a post-anal tail is going to typically have skeletal and muscular elements. So you can see that the notochord does go all the way back here. So it's going to provide structure for these muscles to pull against. So some are going to use this for propulsion, for swimming. So things like fish that have a large post-anal tail. So we have two groups of chordates here that have all four of those characteristics, but are not considered vertebrates. So the first one are the Cephalochordata. The common name for these are lancelets. Amphioxus is actually the genus, so that's not a common name. And they're typically named for their blade-like shape, so that like a lance. They look like a lance. They, as a larva, will swim through the water column, but as an adult, they typically will sink down into the sediment at the bottom, and then they kind of swim up and down to filter feed in the water column. Globally, these are not very common, but actually in Florida, in Tampa Bay, these are very common, and these are going to retain all of the chordate characteristics into adulthood. So you can see that they have the notochord, the nerve cord, the pharyngeal slits, as well as the tail in this adult lancelet. The next group is Eurochordata. So you can see by my tree that Eurochordata is sister to the vertebrates. So these are my vertebrates, everything from here over. So Eurochordata, even though they're grouped usually with Cephalochordata, are actually more closely related to all of these guys than they are to the Cephalochordates. And Eurochordates look a little funky. They have all of the 4 characteristics as a larva, so notochord, tail, nerve cord, pharynx. Their larval stage can be really fast. It can last as short as just a few minutes. And what they do is they swim and find some place to settle, and they use light sensing and gravity sensing cells to find an area where they want to settle and then become a sessile, non-moving creature. And so this is an adult, and these are called tunicates, and they retain the pharynx, which they use for filter feeding, and they lose pretty much every other chordate characteristic in their adult form. So they go through a metamorphosis, which includes a 90-degree rotation. And so they used to be kind of straight through, and now they rotate by 90 degrees here. So they will pull water in, filter it out in this sac, and then excurrent cipher it out through here. And then you can see this is the gut tube coming down to the stomach, and then they excrete waste through the anus. The word tunic is kind of like a shirt. So these are called tunicates because they have this outer covering that covers their internal structure. And these are often called sea squirts. So if you pull a tunicate out of the water, they will be full of water usually, and you can squeeze them and they will squirt water out of the excurrent siphon, and they look a little bit like a squirt gun. So they have lost a lot of characteristics that we see, like having a head, eyes, any kind of light-dark sensor, and we believe that this is due to the loss of 4 of those Hox genes. So those are those genes that code for body plan. So losing those characteristics is actually a derived trait because it is only here and not shared with any of these other groups.